She didn't knock. She didn't hesitate. Pamela Cross walked straight into the owner's suite, stopped in front of the woman in seat 1, and looked down at her as a way someone looks at something that doesn't belong. Then she reached down, no warning, no permission, and grabbed the leather tote off the seat beside her. One hand. Like picking up trash. "Honey, I don't know who let you on this plane, but black girls don't sit up here. This cabin is not for you. Now grab your things and move to the back before I have security drag you off." The woman didn't move, didn't blink. That stillness made Pamela angrier than any argument could have. She looked her up and down, the natural hair, the simple white blouse, the flat shoes, and let out a short, dry laugh. "Look at you. No jewelry, no designer bag. You rode up here on someone else's goodwill, didn't you, baby? I've seen your type before, always trying to sneak into spaces that weren't built for you." Then she leaned in close, voice low, each word a deliberate cut. "You're a black woman in a hoodie sitting in a $65,000 seat, and that doesn't add up. Not on my plane. Not today. Not ever." She threw the tote down the aisle like garbage. Then she raised her hand and brought it down open palm full force across the woman's face. The crack echoed through the entire cabin. 5 seconds of silence. Then the woman touched her cheek and said almost gently, "You just ended your own career." 15 minutes later, Pamela Cross was standing alone on the tarmac, watching the jet she would never work on again disappear into the sky. Have you ever watched someone destroy everything in 15 minutes flat? Stay with me because what comes next will change the way you see everything. Drop a comment with your location and local time. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is exactly the kind of story we tell here. The morning of Tuesday, September 17th, began the way most mornings did for Victoria Reeves, quietly, without ceremony, without anyone watching. Her black SUV pulled up to the private terminal at Van Nuys Airport at exactly 6:15 a.m. The sky was still pale, streaked with thin bands of orange and pink along the horizon, the kind of early morning light that makes everything look temporarily forgiving. The air smelled like jet fuel and cold asphalt. Ground crews in yellow vests moved between aircraft in the distance, their breath forming small white clouds in the September chill. The door opened, and Victoria stepped out alone. No assistant, no publicist, no driver holding a sign with her name on it. Just her rolling carry-on in one hand, leather tote over one shoulder, a slim laptop case tucked under her arm. She wore wide-leg charcoal trousers, a simple white blouse, and flat leather shoes she'd owned for 4 years. Her natural hair was pulled back loosely. No jewelry, except a thin gold watch her father had given her the day she graduated from Spelman College 23 years ago, back when she had $32 in her checking account, and more ambition than anyone around her knew what to do with. She walked through the private terminal at a pace that was unhurried but purposeful. A woman who had somewhere to be and had long since stopped needing to prove it. The gate agent, a woman named Carol, who had checked Victoria in dozens of times, looked up from her desk and smiled. "Good morning, Ms. Reeves. You're all set. N-RGV-9 is fueled and ready." Victoria smiled back, a real one, not the kind people put on for rooms full of cameras. "Thank you, Carol. Tell your daughter good luck with her applications." Carol blinked, surprised she remembered. Victoria always remembered. She walked out onto the tarmac. Her aircraft waited at the far end. A Bombardier Global 7500 tail number N-RGV-9 cream exterior with a single charcoal stripe running the length of the fuselage. $63 million of engineering registered under Reeves Global Ventures, managed day-to-day by Skyline Elite Charter. Victoria owned it outright, had for 6 years. She climbed the air stairs, and the familiar scent of the cabin greeted her cool, recycled air, a faint trace of cedar from the diffuser near the galley, the clean smell of polished surfaces. The interior was understated and warm ivory leather, dark walnut paneling, 4 oversized seats in the main cabin, and a private suite in the rear. Everything exactly as she'd configured it 3 years ago when she'd had the aircraft refitted. She settled into seat 1, always seat 1, left side window, and placed her tote on the seat beside her. She opened her laptop, pulled up the acquisition documents for the meeting ahead, and set a small potted plant on the side table next to her coffee. A lucky bamboo barely 6 inches tall in a simple ceramic pot. Her assistant had tried to talk her out of bringing it on flights more than once, citing some regulation or another. Victoria kept bringing it anyway. Her grandmother had kept one on the windowsill of her apartment in Compton for 40 years. She said it kept bad energy out. Victoria wasn't superstitious, but she wasn't willing to test the theory either. She was flying to Atlanta, Georgia, to close a $290 million acquisition of a regional healthcare logistics company, a deal 3 years in the making, the kind that would expand Reeves Global Ventures into a market segment she'd been quietly building toward since 2019. It was by any measure a significant morning, the kind of morning that would add another chapter to a story that had started in a 2-bedroom apartment in Compton, with a father who drove a school bus and a daughter who refused to accept that the world had already decided her ceiling. Victoria Reeves was 49 years old. She had grown up with nothing that the world considered valuable. No connections, no generational wealth, no safety net. Her mother had left when Victoria was 7. Her father, Jerome, had raised her alone, working double shifts, packing her lunches, sitting at the kitchen table helping her with homework. He barely understood himself, quietly certain that she was going to do something that mattered. She had earned a full scholarship to Spelman College in Atlanta, then an MBA from Wharton at 26. Then she had walked away from a 6-figure offer at a private equity firm in New York and started her own company from a 400-square-foot office in downtown Los Angeles with 1 employee herself and a business plan she had rewritten 11 times. That was 22 years ago. Reeves Global Ventures now spanned private equity technology infrastructure and commercial real estate across 14 states. Current valuation, $3.9 billion. She appeared on exactly 3 magazine covers in her entire career, all 3 times against her preference, all 3 times, because her attorney told her the visibility was strategically necessary. She gave 2 interviews a year, maximum. She did not have a personal Instagram account. She did not attend galas unless the cause was something she personally believed in. She had a rule she had followed since the beginning, through every boardroom and every negotiation and every moment when the world had looked at her and reached the wrong conclusion. Never announce yourself. Let the room figure it out. It was a philosophy born from experience, because Victoria Reeves had learned early and repeatedly that the way people treated you when they didn't know your net worth told you everything you needed to know about their character. She had been underestimated in boardrooms in Manhattan. She had been passed over by valets in Chicago. She had been asked twice by 2 different men at 2 different industry conferences whether she was part of the catering staff. She had never corrected any of them loudly. She had simply continued doing what she always did, building quietly with patience and precision, until the results made the correction for her. This morning she had no reason to expect anything different. She was on her own aircraft, flying to close her own deal, sitting in her own seat. The gate had sealed behind her. The ground crew had finished their checks. The morning was still quiet, still pale, still full of the particular kind of potential that exists only in the hour before the world fully wakes up. Victoria took a sip of her coffee, opened the first page of the acquisition documents, and settled in. She had no idea that the woman who was about to board behind her had already glanced at the flight manifest on the galley tablet had seen the name Victoria Reeves listed clearly as principal client, and had chosen in that single moment to ignore everything she had just read. Pamela Cross had been with Skyline Elite Charter for 11 years. 11 years of pressed uniforms and polished shoes. 11 years of memorizing client preferences, managing difficult passengers with what her performance reviews called exceptional composure, and building a reputation that on paper was nearly flawless. Senior flight attendant, highest seniority tier. The kind of employee whose name appeared at the top of crew assignment lists without question. She was 45 years old, blonde hair pulled into a tight chignon uniform pressed to geometric precision. She moved through the terminal that morning with the particular confidence of someone who had never, in 11 years, been told she was wrong. She wasn't supposed to be on this flight. Her regular route, a charter from Van Nuys to Denver, had been grounded at 5 a.m. due to a maintenance issue with the aircraft. The reassignment came through at 5:47, a last-minute swap. Van Nuys to Atlanta, tail number NRGV9, wheels up at 7:30. She had 14 minutes to grab her bag from the crew lounge, get her coffee, and make it to the aircraft. She did not review the flight manifest. This was according to Skyline Elite's standard operating procedure, a non-negotiable step before every charter flight. Client profile seating configuration, special requests, principal client designation. All of it was accessible on the crew tablet in the galley, updated in real time. Every crew member was required to review it before boarding. Pamela had skipped this step before. She would later claim in a deposition that the reassignment hadn't given her adequate time. The timestamp on the reassignment notice showed she had 43 minutes from notification to boarding. She boarded the aircraft at 7:08 a.m. Jade Simmons, the junior flight attendant, was already in the galley, arranging the beverage service. Jade was 24 years old, 4 months into the job, still in the phase where everything about private charter aviation felt slightly unreal: the aircraft, the clients, the quiet luxury of it all. She had reviewed the manifest at 6:55. She knew exactly who the principal client was. Pamela set her bag down in the galley, poured herself a coffee, and asked Jade if the client had boarded. "Yes," Jade said. "She's in seat 1. Ms. Reeves." Pamela looked at Jade. "Yes, Victoria Reeves. She's the principal client. She owns the aircraft through her company." Pamela said nothing. She picked up her coffee. And then she did something that Jade would describe in precise detail 8 weeks later in a sworn deposition in front of 2 attorneys and a federal investigator. She walked to the galley tablet. She looked at the manifest. The name Victoria Reeves was displayed clearly at the top under the heading Principal Client Reeves Global Ventures. Pamela stared at it for approximately 4 seconds. Then she set her coffee down, straightened her jacket, and walked into the main cabin. She had seen the name. She had read the designation. She had chosen, in full possession of that information, to proceed as though she hadn't. What Jade saw next from her position in the galley doorway she would never forget for the rest of her life. Pamela walked into the cabin and stopped in front of seat 1. Victoria Reeves was seated with her laptop open, earbuds, and a half-finished cup of coffee on the side table beside a small ceramic pot with a bamboo plant in it. She looked up when she sensed someone standing over her and removed one earbud. Pamela didn't introduce herself, didn't smile, didn't follow a single one of the greeting protocols she had spent 11 years performing on autopilot. She just looked down at Victoria the way you look at something that has gotten into a place it shouldn't be. Then she turned and walked back to the galley. She stopped beside Jade and lowered her voice. "That woman in the owner's suite, she doesn't look right. Keep an eye on her." Jade stared at her. "She's the principal client. She owns—" I said, "Keep an eye on her." Jade said nothing. She nodded once mechanically and hated herself immediately for it. Pamela picked up her coffee and went back into the cabin. What came out of her mouth in the next 3 minutes had not been spontaneous. It had not been a misunderstanding. It had not been a mistake born of stress or a rushed morning or an honest confusion about who was supposed to be sitting where. It was a choice deliberate, informed, and rooted in something far uglier than any of those explanations could account for. This was not. It would later emerge the first time. 7 months earlier, a black female executive named Denise Holbrook had boarded a Skyline Elite charter as the primary client. She had been dressed similarly to Victoria business casual, no visible jewelry, natural hair. Pamela had been assigned to that flight as well. According to Denise's formal complaint filed the following day, Pamela had told her the owner's suite was reserved for the primary client and asked her to wait in the rear cabin until the situation could be clarified. Denise Holbrook was the primary client. Her complaint had been received by Frank Edens, a mid-level HR manager at Skyline Elite, who had been handling internal complaints for 6 years. He reviewed it for 11 minutes. He typed a single-paragraph response. He closed the case with the notation, "Insufficient evidence to substantiate the claim. No further action required." He had typed that same sentence with minor variations on 3 separate occasions involving Pamela Cross and 3 separate passengers of color. Nobody had connected the pattern. Or if they had, nobody had said so out loud. Pamela Cross had walked away from every single one of those complaints without consequence, without reprimand, without so much as a conversation. And that history, that long, undisturbed record of getting away with it, was sitting in her chest like a set of armor as she walked back into the main cabin that morning, stopped in front of Victoria Reeves, and reached for her leather tote. She had done this before. She had always won before. She had absolutely no reason to believe today would be any different. Pamela stopped directly in front of seat 1. She crossed her arms. She looked down at Victoria with the particular expression of someone who has already reached a verdict and is simply waiting for the formality of announcing it. Victoria looked up from her laptop. She removed both earbuds this time. She said nothing. She simply waited. "Can I see your boarding confirmation?" The words were professional on their surface, but the tone beneath them was not. It was the tone of someone who has already decided the answer is wrong, regardless of what the document says. Sharp, presumptuous. The kind of voice that doesn't ask questions, it administers them. Victoria reached into her tote without any visible reaction. She pulled out her phone, opened the Skyline Elite Client app, and held the screen toward Pamela. The display showed the charter confirmation in full, her name, the flight number, the tail number, today's date, her designation as principal client of Reeves Global Ventures. Pamela glanced at it. Barely 2 seconds. Then she tilted her head slightly and exhaled through her nose. "That confirms a booking. It doesn't confirm you're authorized for this section." "I'm authorized for the entire aircraft," Victoria said. Her voice was level, measured, the kind of calm that doesn't come from indifference, it comes from practice. She put her phone down and reached for her earbuds. That was the moment. That simple, quiet act of turning back to her work, of refusing to perform anxiety, refusing to justify herself further, refusing to be rattled, did something to Pamela Cross that no argument could have done. It enraged her. Not loudly, not visibly, not yet. But something tightened in her jaw, something hardened behind her eyes, and she took 1 step closer. "Look at you," Pamela said. Her voice had dropped, still professional in volume, but stripped of any pretense of neutrality now. She looked at Victoria the way you look at something you've already categorized. "No jewelry, no designer bag. You rode up here on someone else's goodwill, didn't you? Baby, I've seen your type before. Always trying to sneak into spaces that weren't built for you." She paused. Then slightly lower, just loud enough for Jade, frozen in the galley doorway with a tray of glasses in her hands, to hear every word, "Sit in the back where you belong." At least back there, nobody has to look at you. In the galley, Jade's grip tightened on the tray. She did not move. She did not speak. Her eyes were fixed on the back of Pamela's head, and her heart was hammering against her ribs because she knew she had known since the moment Pamela walked past her in the galley and said, "Keep an eye on her," that this was going to get worse before it stopped. Victoria had still not raised her voice, had still not moved from her seat. Her hands were resting on the armrests. Her expression composed her eyes on Pamela with the same steady focus she brought to boardrooms and depositions, and every room where someone had decided she didn't belong. Her phone rang. The screen lit up on the side table beside the bamboo plant Dominique, her daughter. Victoria reached for it. "You need to put that phone away," Pamela said immediately, her voice snapping back to its official register. "Deal with what's happening here." Victoria looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then she answered the call. "Hey, baby." Her voice shifted not dramatically, just slightly, the way it always did when she talked to her daughter. Warmer. "I'll call you back in a few minutes." "Mom, is everything okay? I can hear someone." "I love you." She ended the call, set the phone down. In her apartment in Los Angeles, Dominique Reeves sat on her couch and stared at the screen for a long moment. She had heard enough. The voice in the background, the tone of it. The controlled, too careful way her mother had said, "I'll call you back, not everything's fine, not bad time, just I'll call you back," in the voice she used when she was managing something and didn't want to show it. Dominique set her phone on the cushion beside her and sat very still, 300 miles away, with no way to know what was happening on that plane and no way to do anything about it. Back in the cabin, Pamela had taken a breath and recalibrated. She uncrossed her arms, planted both hands on her hips, and moved into the next phase of the confrontation, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before and knew exactly where it was going. She walked to the seat beside Victoria, where the leather tote was sitting, and grabbed it with both hands. "Let me help you find a more suitable seat." She didn't ask. She didn't wait. She just picked up the bag and started walking it down the aisle toward the back of the aircraft, as though the matter had already been settled, as though Victoria's presence in that seat was a clerical error she was simply correcting. Victoria stood up. When she rose from seat 1, the energy in the cabin changed. She was not a physically imposing woman, 5'6", slender, but the stillness she carried, the absolute absence of panic in her posture, filled the space in a way that had nothing to do with size. "Put my bag down," she said. Her voice did not rise, did not waver. "I'm not moving anywhere." Pamela stopped mid-step. She turned around slowly, still holding the tote. Something crossed her face, a flicker of something she recovered from almost instantly. Then she walked back down the aisle and dropped the bag. Not placed. Dropped. It hit the floor with a hard thud that echoed through the cabin. She leaned in and lowered her voice to something that was meant to sound like a warning and landed more like a threat. "You don't want to make this difficult. Trust me." She turned away. And as she walked back toward the galley, just loud enough to carry, "This is exactly what happens when people don't know their place." Jade, still standing in the galley doorway, felt her stomach drop. She had heard every word. She had seen every second. And she understood with complete clarity that what was coming next was going to be worse than anything that had happened so far. She was right. Pamela came back. She had been in the galley for less than 3 minutes. Long enough to set down her coffee, long enough for Jade to watch her breathing slow, and her jaw tighten, and her hands smooth down the front of her uniform jacket, in that particular way she had, the way that meant she was resetting, recalibrating, preparing for the next move. Long enough for whatever was driving her to harden into something more deliberate. She walked back into the main cabin and stopped in front of seat 1 again. Victoria had not moved. She had replaced her earbuds, reopened her laptop, and returned to the acquisition documents as though the last 10 minutes had been a minor inconvenience already filed away and forgotten. Her coffee was in her left hand. The bamboo plant sat on the side table beside her. Her tote was back on the seat next to her, where she had placed it after Pamela dropped it on the floor. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman with somewhere important to be, using her time accordingly. Pamela stood over her and waited for her to look up. Victoria did not look up. "I'm going to say this one more time," Pamela said. Her voice was louder now, louder than necessary, louder than professional, the kind of volume that was less about being heard and more about asserting dominance over a space. "You either produce a valid ID that confirms you belong in this section, or I'm calling ground security and having you physically removed from this aircraft. Those are your two options. Choose one." Victoria removed one earbud. She looked up at Pamela with the same steady, unhurried expression she had worn since the beginning of this. "I'd like to speak to your captain." Pamela's eyes went wide, not with surprise exactly, but with the theatrical version of it that people perform when they want to signal that someone has stepped out of line. "You don't get to make demands on my aircraft. You are a passenger. I am the crew. I decide who sits where, and I am telling you, you do not belong here." She pointed down the aisle. The gesture was slow, deliberate, and contemptuous. "Now move, or I make the call." Victoria looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that takes inventory without showing its findings. "Do what you need to do," she said quietly, and she put her earbud back in. Something broke open inside Pamela Cross in that moment. Not loudly, she didn't shout, didn't slam anything. It was quieter than that, and more dangerous. The specific fury of a person who is accustomed to compliance encountering, for perhaps the first time in a very long time, its complete absence. She reached for the headphones. Not the earbuds Victoria was wearing, the over-ear noise-canceling headphones resting on the armrest beside her laptop. Pamela's hand shot out, fast fingers closing around them, like she was confiscating something from a child who had misbehaved. Victoria's hand moved before her mind caught up with the motion, pure reflex, the instinctive response of anyone whose personal space has been invaded without warning. Her hand came up and brushed against Pamela's forearm. It was not a grab. It was not a strike. It was the kind of incidental contact that happens when someone reaches into your space and your body flinches away from them. It lasted less than a second. Pamela recoiled as though she'd been burned. She stumbled back a full step, hand flying to her forearm, eyes going wide in a performance of shock, so polished it might have worked on someone who hadn't seen everything that had led to this moment. And then she swung, open palm, full force, across Victoria Reeves's right cheek. The sound was like a firecracker in a library, a sharp, flat crack that bounced off the mahogany walls, off the leather seats, off every surface in the cabin, and hung in the recycled air like smoke. In the galley, Jade Simmons dropped the glass she was holding. It hit the floor and shattered. Her hand flew to her mouth. Victoria's head turned from the force of the blow. She sat completely still afterward, 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5, with the red mark already rising on her cheek, and her hands resting motionless in her lap. The laptop was still open. The acquisition documents were still on the screen. The bamboo plant was still on the side table, undisturbed. Pamela was breathing hard. Her chest heaved. Both hands were still raised slightly, the posture of someone who has just done something and is deciding in real time how to frame it. Her eyes were bright, her expression shifting rapidly through rage and adrenaline, and something that might, if you were being generous, have been the very first edge of doubt. Then she pointed her finger directly at Victoria's face. "Don't you ever put your hands on me." Her voice was shaking, not with remorse, with conviction. The conviction of someone who has already constructed the story they're going to tell. "I saw what you did. You grabbed me. I had every right to defend myself. She smoothed her jacket, straightened her posture. Her voice shifted suddenly, controlled, suddenly measured, the rage tucked away behind a wall of professional composure that went up so fast it was almost impressive. I'm calling security. You're getting off this plane, and when they arrive, I'm going to tell them exactly what you did. Victoria had not spoken since the slap. She hadn't moved, hadn't raised her hand to her cheek again, hadn't reacted in any of the ways Pamela's calculation had accounted for no tears, no protests, no rising volume that could be characterized as aggression. She simply reached into the pocket of her tote, 2 fingers, slow, deliberate. The kind of movement that draws attention not because it's fast, but because it's so completely unhurried. She pulled out her phone. The screen was already on. The recording app was open. The red timer in the corner read 17 minutes, 12 seconds. She set the phone face up on the armrest. The microphone icon pulsed gently on the screen. She looked up at Pamela Cross, and for the first time in the entire exchange, something in Victoria Reeves's expression shifted. Not anger, not satisfaction. Something quieter and considerably more permanent than either of those things. Everything you've said, everything you've done. The slap, the lie you're about to tell security. She tapped the screen once. Audio and video, all of it, right here. The cabin was absolutely silent. Pamela stared at the phone. The red timer kept counting. 17:19, 17:20, 17:21. And then Pamela Cross did something that told you more clearly than anything else she had done that morning exactly who she was. She smiled. It was not a nervous smile, not an embarrassed one, not the kind that flickers across someone's face when they realize they've miscalculated and are buying time while they figure out the damage. It was cold and composed and completely certain of itself, the smile of a woman who had been in uncomfortable situations before and had always, without exception, come out the other side intact. Pamela Cross had 11 years of history behind that smile. 11 years of complaints that went nowhere. 11 years of a system that had looked at her record and looked at the people who filed against her and decided every single time that she was the more credible party. She had learned through repetition that the machinery bent in her direction. She had no reason to believe a phone recording changed that calculus. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin. "Record whatever you want," she said. Her voice was steady, almost pleasant. "When security gets here, we'll see who they believe a 13-year senior crew member with a spotless record, or a woman who forced her way into a private cabin and became physically aggressive with the crew." She let the word hang in the air for a moment. "I've been doing this a long time, sweetheart. You're not the first difficult passenger I've dealt with. You won't be the last." She turned her back on Victoria, walked to the intercom panel near the galley, and pressed the button for ground operations. Her voice transformed the moment she opened the channel softer higher, carrying just the right degree of controlled distress. It was a performance of such technical precision that Jade, watching from 2 feet away, felt briefly and horribly convinced by it, despite having seen everything that had led to this moment. "Ground Ops, this is Senior Attendant Cross on NRGV-9. I need security at the aircraft immediately. We have an unruly passenger in the owner's suite who is refusing to comply with crew instructions." A pause. Then, quieter, confiding, she became physically aggressive. She grabbed my arm. "I feel unsafe. Please send someone now." She released the button, took one slow breath, turned back toward the cabin with her expression reset to something that read from a distance as calm professionalism and up close as the face of a woman who had already won and was simply waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. In the galley, Jade Simmons stood with the pieces of the broken glass still on the floor around her feet, and her heart somewhere in the vicinity of her throat. She had not moved since the slap, had not spoken, had not done a single thing except stand there and watch and feel the weight of her own silence accumulating around her like something physical. She was 24 years old. She had been in this job for 4 months. She knew what had happened to the last person who had crossed Pamela Cross publicly, a junior attendant named Rachel, who had politely suggested an alternative seating arrangement during a crew briefing and had been transferred to a cargo operation in Memphis within 3 weeks. Pamela had never admitted to anything. She never did. But the message had been received by every junior crew member at Skyline Elite with absolute clarity. Jade knew all of this. She was standing in it, and she still could not make herself stop seeing what she had seen. 2 minutes later, footsteps on the air stairs. Officer Callahan boarded first. He was in his mid-50s, gray at the temples, with the unhurried movements of a man who had spent 30 years in various forms of security work and had long since learned not to arrive at conclusions before he arrived at facts. His younger partner, Officer Tron, late 20s, hand resting near his radio, followed 2 steps behind. Pamela intercepted them at the cabin door before they had taken 3 steps inside. She spoke quickly, gesturing with controlled precision, her voice carrying exactly the right combination of professional authority and personal distress. "Thank you for coming." The woman in seat 1 she forced her way into the owner's suite refused multiple direct requests to relocate to an appropriate section, and then became physically aggressive when I attempted to enforce crew protocol. She grabbed my arm. I had to defend myself. She's been hostile and threatening since I boarded. She pointed toward Victoria without looking at her. "I need her removed, immediately." Callahan nodded once. He did not rush. He walked down the aisle toward seat 1 with the measured pace of someone gathering information rather than executing a predetermined outcome. Victoria was seated, laptop still open, phone still recording on the armrest, the red timer now past 19 minutes. Her expression was composed. Her cheek still carried the red mark. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Callahan with Van Nuys Ground Security. May I see some identification, please?" Victoria reached into her tote. No sudden movements. She produced her wallet, opened it, and handed over her driver's license. Callahan took it, looked at the photo, looked at her face, looked at the name. Victoria Reeves. He held the license for a half-second longer than the situation required. Something shifted behind his eyes, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. But Jade, watching from the galley doorway, saw it. The slight stillness, the recalibration. He took 3 steps away from the seat, turned his back to the cabin, and keyed his radio. His voice was low and professional. "Ground Ops, this is Callahan. Need ownership verification on tail NRGV9. Confirm the registered charter client for today's flight." Silence. 10 seconds. 15. 20. Pamela Cross, standing near the forward galley, used those 20 seconds to adjust her cuff, straighten her already straight jacket, and exchange a brief glance with Officer Tron that carried in it the quiet confidence of a woman who had played this scene before and knew exactly how the next line went. She was still smiling when the radio crackled. Callahan confirmed. Tail NRGV9 is registered to Reeves Global Ventures. Today's sole charter client is Victoria Reeves, founder and CEO of the registering company. She is the principal client on file. The aircraft is registered under her company's ownership. Callahan lowered his radio. He stood very still for a moment. Then he turned, not toward Victoria, toward Pamela. The smile on Pamela's face did not disappear immediately. It took approximately 2 seconds, 2 full seconds of looking at Callahan's expression for it to dissolve. And when it went, it did not go gradually. It dropped all at once like something that had been cut loose. Beside her, Officer Tran's hand had fallen away from his radio. His mouth was slightly open. He was looking at Pamela the way you look at someone you have just realized you fundamentally misread. Callahan walked back down the aisle toward Victoria. His tone had changed, not unprofessional, but different. Quieter. Carrying something that in another context might have been described as contrition. Ms. Reeves, I sincerely apologize for the disruption. Is there anything you need from us at this time? Victoria looked at him. A long, measured look. The look of a woman who had been waiting, with complete patience, for exactly this moment. Then she said 4 words. Remove her from my plane. The cabin went absolutely silent. Pamela Cross opened her mouth. Wait, what? No, that can't be right. She can't be. Look at her. She doesn't. She stopped. She never finished the sentence. She didn't need to. Every person in that cabin heard exactly what she had been about to say. The words she swallowed were louder in that silence than anything she had shouted. The silence lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds in which nobody in the cabin moved. Not Callahan, not Officer Tran, not Pamela with her unfinished sentence still hanging in the recycled air between her and everything she had built over 11 years. 4 seconds in which the only sound was the faint hum of the aircraft's ventilation system and the barely audible pulse of the recording app on Victoria's armrest. Then Jade Simmons stepped out of the galley. She came forward slowly, her hands at her sides, the dustpan she'd been holding set down somewhere behind her. She was 24 years old, and she had been in this job for 4 months, and she was by every practical measure the least powerful person on this aircraft. She knew what had happened to Rachel. She knew what Pamela was capable of when she felt challenged. She knew that speaking up right now could cost her the career she had spent 3 years working toward before she'd even properly begun it. She stepped forward anyway. Her voice, when it came, was small, almost a whisper. But it got stronger with each sentence the way a person's voice does when they have decided, not casually, not without cost, to stop being afraid. Officers, I need to tell you what actually happened. Pamela's head snapped toward her. The look on her face was not the measured professional composure she had worn for the past 20 minutes. It was raw and immediate and furious. Jade. Her voice was a warning dressed up as a name. Don't. Jade looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then she turned to Callahan and kept going. I was in the galley from the beginning of the interaction. I saw everything. She paused, steadied herself. Ms. Cross approached Ms. Reeves without reviewing the manifest. Ms. Reeves showed her the charter confirmation on the Skyline Elite app. Ms. Cross dismissed it. She took Ms. Reeves's bag from the seat without permission and attempted to move it to the rear cabin. Ms. Reeves stood up and asked her to stop. Ms. Cross dropped the bag on the floor. The cabin was utterly still. Ms. Cross returned a second time and demanded Ms. Reeves produce additional identification or face removal by security. Ms. Reeves asked to speak to the captain. Ms. Cross told her she didn't have the right to make demands. Jade's voice was steady, now fully steady. Then Ms. Cross reached for Ms. Reeves's personal belongings on the armrest. Ms. Reeves pulled back. That was the only contact. She pulled back. Ms. Cross recoiled, and then she struck Ms. Reeves across the face with an open hand. A beat. There was no grab. There was no assault. Ms. Reeves did not touch Ms. Cross. The only person who made physical contact with anyone in this cabin was Ms. Cross. The ventilation system hummed. Nobody moved. Pamela took 1 step toward Jade. Her voice dropped to something low and venomous, and shaking with a rage she was no longer making any effort to conceal. You have been on this job for 4 months. 4 months. You don't know how this works. You don't know what you saw. And when this is over, I promise you I will make sure you never work another flight, as long as that is enough. Callahan's voice cut through the cabin like a door slamming shut. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. There was a quality in it. Flat final, the voice of someone who has heard everything he needs to hear, that stopped Pamela mid-sentence as effectively as a physical barrier. Miss Cross, stop talking. Right now. Pamela closed her mouth. Her hands were trembling at her sides. At that exact moment, the cockpit door opened. Captain Daniel Hurst stepped into the cabin. He was still wearing his headset around his neck, still in his pre-flight configuration, his expression carrying the careful neutrality of a man who has been listening to a security channel for the past 4 minutes and has arrived with a very clear picture of what he is walking into. He looked at Callahan. Callahan gave him a short, precise summary, 30 seconds, no editorializing. He looked at Jade. He looked at Victoria, still seated in seat 1, the red mark on her cheek visible from across the cabin. He looked at Pamela. His expression over the course of those 30 seconds moved from professional neutrality to something that could only be described as controlled fury held at a very short distance. He turned to Pamela. His voice was quiet, military precise. Miss Cross, you are relieved of duty on this flight effective immediately. Collect your personal belongings. You have 60 seconds to deplane. Pamela's mouth opened. Captain, if you'll just let me explain, I felt threatened. She made contact with my... That was not a request. 60 seconds, starting now. Something in Pamela's face cracked. Not dramatically, not the collapse of a person experiencing remorse. More like the fracture of a structure that has been under too much pressure for too long and has finally found the point it cannot hold. The composure she had maintained with such technical precision for the past 23 minutes simply left. What remained was something smaller, something stripped a woman standing in a cabin that no longer recognized her authority and had no interest in pretending otherwise. She grabbed her bag from the galley. Her movements were jerky, uncoordinated. The polished efficiency she wore like a second uniform was gone entirely. She walked down the aisle toward the cabin door, and her heels, those heels that had clicked against the cabin floor, with such deliberate authority when she had marched toward Victoria 40 minutes ago, now struck an uneven, irregular rhythm. Not a march, a retreat. At the top of the air stairs, she stopped. She turned back. Her mouth opened for what no one would ever know. A final argument, maybe. Or a plea. Or simply the reflex of a woman who had never in 11 years left a confrontation without the last word. The cabin door swung shut. The hydraulic seal engaged with a soft, final thud. The last thing Pamela Cross saw through the narrowing gap was the back of Victoria Reeves's head, turned toward her laptop, already returned to her documents, already past her, before the door closed completely and the morning light outside disappeared. Victoria set her phone down. The recording timer read 23 minutes, 41 seconds. She looked out the window at the pale September sky for a moment. Then she picked up her personal phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Miles Crawford picked up on the second ring. Victoria, it's early. What happened? I need you to move on something, she said. Her voice was calm, completely surgically calm. Now. Miles Crawford had been Victoria Reeves's attorney for 18 years. He had seen her walk away from things that would have leveled most people. A hostile takeover attempt in 2014 that she absorbed, restructured around, and turned into a profitable acquisition within 8 months. A discrimination lawsuit filed against her own company in 2018 was eventually dismissed that she had handled with such methodical precision that the opposing counsel had privately admitted to a colleague it was the most composed response he had ever witnessed from a defendant. A boardroom ambush in 2020, where where 3 male partners had attempted to dilute her voting shares during a refinancing negotiation and had found themselves 6 weeks later bought out entirely at below market valuation. Miles had watched her absorb all of it. He had watched her let things go that she had every right to pursue, choosing long-term positioning over short-term satisfaction with a consistency that sometimes frustrated him, even as it impressed him. He listened to everything she told him, all of it. The manifest, the 3 lines Pamela had delivered before she ever asked a single professional question. The tote dropped on the floor. The phone call with Dominique interrupted mid-sentence. The reach for the headphones, the slap, the fabricated radio call to ground security, the smile. When she finished, the line was silent for 4 seconds. Then Miles said quietly, "I've watched you walk away from situations like this more times than I can count. Every time you said it wasn't worth the energy. Every time you said the position was more valuable than the fight." A pause. "Don't walk away from this one." "I'm not," Victoria said. "That's why I'm calling." Miles moved fast. By the time the Bombardier Global 7500 reached cruising altitude over the California desert, he had a 4-part strategy documented and ready for execution. First, a formal assault complaint filed with Van Nuys Airport ground security with the full 23-minute 41-second recording attached as primary evidence. Officer Callahan had already submitted his incident report. Officer Tran had corroborated it. Jade Simmons had agreed in a brief phone call Miles made while the jet was still climbing to provide a sworn written statement. Second, a formal demand letter sent to Skyline Elite Charter's legal department, requiring a written response within 48 hours. The letter outlined the incident in precise detail, attached the recording, and specified that Reeves Global Ventures was formally initiating a review of its charter management contract, a contract worth $11 million per year, Skyline Elite's single largest client relationship. Third, a demand for a full internal investigation into Pamela Cross's complete employment history. Every complaint ever filed, every case ever opened, every disposition, every manager who had signed off on every closure. Not a summary. The unfiltered file. Fourth, notification that Victoria Reeves had authorized investigative journalist Imani Rhodes to receive the recording and all supporting documentation pending the outcome of Skyline Elite's formal response. Miles sent the first 3 items before Victoria's wheels touched Atlanta. While the jet was still in the air, Victoria made one more call. Dominique picked up before the first ring finished. "Mom, what happened?" I heard her voice and then the line just, "I'm okay," Victoria said. "You don't sound okay. You sound like you're holding something." Victoria looked out the window at the flat Georgia landscape coming into view below the pine forests and the red clay and the sprawl of Atlanta spreading across the horizon like something still being built. "Someone on the aircraft made some assumptions about me," she said, "based on what I looked like, where I was sitting." Dominique was quiet for a moment. "Did she?" "Yes." The line was silent for 6 full seconds. Then Dominique said something that stopped Victoria completely, not because it was surprising, but because it was so precisely the right question asked in exactly the right way by a 22-year-old woman who had clearly been listening more carefully than her mother had fully realized. "Mom, how many women has she done this to who didn't have a recording, who didn't own the plane?" Victoria closed her eyes. "That's exactly why I'm not letting this go," she said quietly. After she hung up, she sat for a long moment with her hands in her lap and the Atlanta skyline growing in the window beside her. Then she opened her phone and typed a single message to Miles Authorize Imani. Full recording, full documentation. She can have everything. Owen Slate, CEO of Skyline Elite Charter, was in a breakfast meeting at his office in Burbank when Miles Crawford's demand letter hit his inbox at 9:47 a.m. He excused himself from the meeting. He sat at his desk and opened the letter. He read it once quickly, then again slowly. Then he opened the attached recording and pressed play. He listened to all 23 minutes and 41 seconds of it. His coffee went cold beside him. His hands were flat on the desk. His face, by the time the timer ran out, had the gray, depleted quality of a man who has just watched something he cannot unsee and cannot unfeel and cannot, under any interpretation of events, explain away. He picked up his phone and called Victoria Reeves directly. Miles Crawford answered. "Mr. Slate, Ms. Reeves is not available to take calls from Skyline Elite until a formal written response has been received. You have 48 hours. The line went dead. Owen set his phone down. He called his head of HR. He called his legal team. He told them both the same thing in the same flat, stripped voice: pull Pamela Cross's complete employee file. Everything, every complaint, every disposition, every name. What HR brought him 3 hours later made his legal team go very quiet. 3 prior complaints, all from passengers of color. All dismissed by the same manager, Frank Edens, with the same boilerplate notation: insufficient evidence. No further action required. And beneath those 3, a 4th case, the Denise Holbrook complaint from 7 months ago that had never been formally logged. It had been received by Edens via email, acknowledged with a 2-line reply, and quietly set aside without ever entering the system. Pamela Cross was terminated by end of business that same day. Frank Edens was placed on administrative leave within the hour. Owen Slate's settlement offer arrived in Miles Crawford's inbox at 6:14 p.m. A formal written apology, lifetime complimentary charter services for Reeves Global Ventures, and a payment of $750,000 for emotional distress and reputational harm. Miles forwarded it to Victoria with a single line of his own: "Your call." Victoria read it once. Then she typed back 4 words: "Tell him we'll talk." But not about the money. Miles Crawford's response to Owen Slate's settlement offer arrived at 8:03 the following morning. It was 3 sentences. Ms. Reeves has no interest in Skyline Elite's money. She is not for sale, and neither is her dignity. Owen read it twice. Then he called his legal team and told them to clear their afternoon. Victoria's counter-demands were not financial. They were structural, institutional, and from the perspective of a company that had spent 2 decades building a brand around the language of luxury and discretion, considerably more costly than any dollar figure could have been. First, a formal public acknowledgement from Skyline Elite Charter that systemic failures in its internal complaint handling process had allowed a documented pattern of racial discrimination to continue unchecked for a minimum of 3 years. Not a private letter. A public statement reviewed and approved by an independent civil rights organization before release. Second, a full third-party audit of Skyline Elite's HR procedures, complaint protocols, and bias reporting infrastructure, conducted entirely by an outside civil rights organization with no financial relationship to the company. The findings to be made public in their entirety. Third, mandatory bias. Awareness training for every Skyline Elite employee. Flight crews, ground staff, middle management, senior leadership executives, designed and delivered by the independent auditing organization funded entirely by Skyline Elite, completed within 6 months. Owen Slate agreed to all 3 demands within 36 hours. He didn't negotiate. He didn't push back on the timeline. He didn't ask for modifications to the language of the public statement. His legal team later described his decision-making in those 36 hours as the most efficient they had ever witnessed from a CEO facing a reputational crisis. What they didn't say, but understood, was that he had already seen what was coming, and had calculated that the only thing worse than agreeing to Victoria's terms was being seen publicly to resist them, because Imani Rhodes had already been working for 4 days. Her article was published on a Wednesday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. The headline was precise and unambiguous. Slapped on her own jet, how a black female billionaire's 15 minutes exposed years of systemic bias at Skyline Elite Charter. The piece was 4,000 words, every fact verified, every source named or documented. Imani had obtained Skyline Elite's internal HR records through a source inside the company. She had interviewed Jade Simmons on the record. She had reviewed Officer Callahan's incident report and Officer Tran's corroborating statement. She had reached out to Pamela Cross for comment 3 times. Pamela had not responded. The article included selected audio from the recording with Victoria's full written consent. Not the entire 23 minutes, just enough. Pamela's voice telling Victoria that black girls don't sit up here. The sound of the tote hitting the floor. The crack of the slap. And then the silence that followed 5 full seconds of it before Victoria said 4 words. That silence was what people couldn't stop sharing. Within 12 hours, the audio clips embedded in the article had been played 9 million times. Within 24 hours, 17 million. By the end of the second day, the number had crossed 23 million and was still climbing. The story did not merely trend, it detonated. Every major platform amplified it simultaneously. Cable news ran segments through the afternoon and evening. Morning shows played the clip on repeat. Podcasters spent hours dissecting it. The hashtags Her Own Plane and Pamela Cross dominated trending lists for 4 consecutive days. 2 days after the article published, a black physician named Dr. Sandra Okafor came forward publicly. She had filed a complaint against Pamela Cross 14 months earlier, after Pamela had told her on a Skyline Elite charter that her seat assignment had likely been entered in error and attempted to redirect her to a different section. Her complaint had been received by Frank Edens, closed within a week. Insufficient evidence. No further action required. Dr. Okafor's statement added a dimension to the story that the audio clips alone could not, the dimension of time, of repetition, of a system that had seen the pattern and chosen repeatedly and deliberately to look away. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office filed formal criminal charges against Pamela Cross 11 days after the incident. 2 counts. Count 1, simple assault based on the recorded slap, corroborated by Jade Simmons's sworn statement, Officer Callahan's incident report, and Officer Tran's corroborating testimony. Count 2, filing a false security report based on the recorded intercom call in which Pamela told ground operations that Victoria had grabbed her arm and become physically aggressive, statements directly and completely contradicted by the video evidence and every witness present on the aircraft. Pamela's attorney filed a wrongful termination claim against Skyline Elite within 72 hours of her dismissal. His public statement characterized the termination as premature and retaliatory, and argued that Pamela had acted in reasonable self-defense given what he described as an escalating and threatening situation. Nobody engaged with the argument seriously. The recording existed. The recording did not leave room for interpretation. The trial lasted 3 days. It could have lasted 1. The prosecution's approach was simple and surgical. They played the full recording for the jury, unedited, uncut, all 23 minutes and 41 seconds, projected on a screen in a silent courtroom. They called Jade Simmons to the stand. She was nervous, her hands gripping the edge of the witness box, her voice unsteady in the first 2 minutes. But her testimony was precise and consistent and entirely unshakable under cross-examination. She described what she had seen in the order she had seen it, and did not waver once. Captain Hurst provided a written statement confirming that Pamela had not reviewed the flight manifest before boarding, a direct violation of Skyline Elite's standard operating procedure and that her assignment to the flight had given her sufficient time to complete that step. Then Pamela took the stand. Her attorney had coached her carefully. Stay composed. Express remorse. Acknowledge the recording, but contextualize it within a narrative of genuine fear and professional confusion. It lasted approximately 4 minutes before the prosecution asked the question that ended it. Miss Cross, can you explain to this court why you assumed Ms. Reeves did not belong in the owner's suite of her own aircraft? Pamela opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She didn't look like, she wasn't dressed like someone who would... She stopped. 12 jurors stared at her. The gallery, packed with reporters and observers, went absolutely silent. She never finished the sentence. She didn't need to. Every person in that courtroom understood with complete clarity what the missing words were and what they meant. The jury deliberated for 85 minutes. Guilty. Both counts. The judge delivered the sentence without ceremony. 18 months probation. 200 hours of community service to be completed at a civil rights education center, a $20,000 fine, and a permanent criminal record that would appear on every background check she would ever face for the remainder of her professional life. Pamela Cross stood in the courtroom as the verdict was read. She did not cry. She did not react visibly. She stood stiff and hollow, staring at a point somewhere above the judge's head, like a woman watching a door close that she had not until this moment fully believed was going to close. Outside the courthouse, Imani Rhodes published a short follow-up piece. The final line read, "The recording was 23 minutes and 41 seconds long. The silence at the end of it lasted 5 seconds. That silence is what people couldn't stop listening to. Because some truths don't need words. They just need someone to stop filling the air." The Atlanta deal closed on schedule. Victoria Reeves signed the final documents for the $290 million acquisition of Meridian Healthcare Logistics at 2:17 p.m. on the same Tuesday she had left Los Angeles. The signing took 40 minutes. The handshakes were brief. The celebration, by Victoria's standard, was a single glass of water and a quiet drive back to the hotel where she reviewed the integration timeline before dinner. Just another Tuesday. In the weeks that followed, the machinery that Victoria had set in motion continued to move with the same quiet, methodical momentum that had always defined the way she worked. She did not hold a press conference. She did not give interviews to the morning shows that requested them. She did not post anything on social media because she had no social media accounts to post on. She just kept building. Reeves Global Ventures formally terminated its charter management contract with Skyline Elite on the 14th day after the incident. The termination letter drafted by Miles Crawford was 1 page. Professional. Precise. The final paragraph read, "Reeves Global Ventures does not maintain business relationships with organizations whose internal systems have demonstrated a sustained failure to address racial discrimination against its principal clients. We wish Skyline Elite Charter well in its remediation efforts." $11 million a year. Gone. Victoria moved her entire fleet management, the Bombardier Global 7,502 additional aircraft, owned by Reeves Global Ventures, to a competing charter company with a documented, verified record of diversity and equity compliance. The transition took 9 days. The industry response was immediate. Skyline Elite's stock dropped 10.3% in a single trading session following the contract termination announcement. Financial analysts described it as a self-inflicted reputational wound with an uncertain recovery timeline. 2 additional major clients quietly moved their contracts to competing firms in the month that followed, citing no specific reason in their termination letters, but requiring none. The independent audit that Victoria had demanded as part of her counterdemands was completed 8 weeks after the incident. The findings were made public in full as agreed. They were in the language of the civil rights organization that conducted them, indicative of a systemic organizational failure, rather than an isolated individual incident. A documented pattern of underreported complaints, inadequate investigation protocols, and a middle management culture that had functioned, whether intentionally or not, as a suppression mechanism for discrimination claims. Frank Edens was fired with cause following the audit's release. His severance package was revoked. 3 additional Skyline Elite employees were terminated based on findings in the audit report. Owen Slate resigned as CEO 13 months after the incident. His resignation letter cited personal reasons. The board accepted it without a public statement. Nobody believed the personal reasons. Nobody required them to. The mandatory bias training, the third of Victoria's 3 demands, was implemented across all Skyline Elite operations within the required 6-month window. It was designed and delivered by the same civil rights organization that had conducted the audit funded entirely by Skyline Elite. Every crew member, every ground staff employee, every manager, every executive completed it. The curriculum was later adopted in modified form by 2 other aviation companies following consultations with the organization. Pamela Cross applied to 4 airlines after her termination from Skyline Elite. All 4 rejected her. She applied to 2 hospitality companies. Same outcome. Her name had entered the permanent vocabulary of HR departments' compliance training materials and corporate ethics seminars, not as a villain in a cautionary tale exactly, but as a case study. A documented, time-stamped, audio and video verified example of what bias looks like when it is allowed to operate without accountability for long enough to believe itself invisible. A local news outlet found her 8 months after the trial. She had relocated to a small city in another state. She was working in retail. She declined to comment. The reporter noted without elaboration that she appeared diminished, a word that carries in this context no satisfaction and no malice. Simply an observation about what it looks like when a person has been made to live at last, with the full weight of choices they spent years making without consequence. Jade Simmons never returned to Skyline Elite. She didn't need to. The charter company that had taken over Victoria's fleet management offered her a position as senior flight attendant, a title that under normal circumstances would have required 5 more years of seniority to earn. She accepted the same day the offer was made. Captain Hurst wrote a letter of commendation on her behalf to her new employer. It was 2 paragraphs. The second paragraph read, "In 22 years of aviation, I have witnessed very few moments of genuine moral courage in a professional setting. What Ms. Simmons did on September 17th, at significant personal risk, in defense of a passenger who had been wronged, was one of them. She will be an asset to any organization that has the sense to keep her." Jade gave one interview to an aviation trade publication 6 months after the incident. The interviewer asked why she had spoken up when she knew it could cost her everything. She thought about it for a moment. "Because I saw what happened," she said, "and staying silent would have made me part of it. I couldn't live with that." A pause. Silence isn't neutral. It's a choice. That morning, I decided which one I was going to make. Victoria's one interview was with Imani Rhodes, published 4 months after the trial. It was short, less than 1,000 words. Imani asked her what she wanted people to take away from the story. Victoria was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window of the office where they were sitting, the same downtown Los Angeles building, where she had started Reeves Global Ventures, in a 400-square-foot room 22 years ago, now 40 stories of glass and steel registered in her company's name. "I don't want people to remember my name," she said. "I want them to remember that this almost didn't come to light. If I hadn't pressed record that morning, it would have been her word against mine." She paused. "And we both know how that story usually ends." The Reeves Dignity Fund was established 3 months after the incident, endowed with $15 million of Victoria's personal capital. Its mandate was simple free legal representation for individuals, primarily women, and people of color facing documented discrimination in service and hospitality industries nationwide. Airlines, hotels, restaurants, retail, every sector where the powerful meet the public, and the powerful sometimes forget or simply don't care that dignity is not a privilege distributed by uniform or net worth. In its first year of operation, the fund took on 95 cases across 17 states. 16 resulted in settlements. 6 went to trial. All 6 won. One of those 6 cases exposed discriminatory seating and service practices at a major hotel chain practices that had been in place informally and invisibly for at least 4 years. The resulting settlement required the company to rewrite its service protocols across 200 properties and implement mandatory training for 43,000 employees. Victoria personally reviewed every quarterly report the fund produced. She attended no galas in its honor. She gave no speeches about it. She simply read the reports, approved the budgets, and kept building the way she had always built from the beginning before anyone was watching. She still flew private, still wore simple blouses, still boarded alone without an entourage, without a sign. The bamboo plant still traveled with her, still in the same ceramic pot, still on the same side table beside her seat. Her assistant still mentioned the regulation occasionally. Victoria still brought it anyway. Her grandmother had kept one on the windowsill for 40 years. Some things you carry with you not because they make sense, but because they remind you where you started. And where you started for Victoria Reeves was a 2-bedroom apartment in Compton, with a father who drove a school bus and told her every single morning before school the same 4 words. "You belong everywhere, baby." She had believed him then. She believed him still. Life lesson. Some people will look at you and see only what they expect. They will look at your clothes, your hair, your skin, and they will decide before you open your mouth what you are worth and where you belong. That kind of blindness is not new. But what this story asks us to remember is this: dignity is not granted by a uniform, a title, or a net worth. It is not something you earn by performing submission to people who have no authority over your humanity. Victoria Reeves did not raise her voice. She did not beg. She did not explain herself beyond what she owed. She simply refused quietly, completely, without drama, to disappear. And that refusal changed everything. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment below. Where in the world are you, and what time is it there? Stories like this deserve to travel further than anyone expects. And if you're not subscribed yet, you already know this is the kind of storytelling that doesn't waste your time. We'll see you in the next one.